Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you once again for watching us at TBC in TV. And thank you so much for being with us again. Sorry for we were not able to do some podcasts for the past 8 months because, as you all know, we moved from England to Scotland, and I did, we did a lot of adjustments in terms of the connectivity and the gadgets and everything. So now we're back, and thank you that you're back with us. So this is Crazy Talks with Wise People. This is Mary Angela Morta, bringing another episode entitled Apologetics for the Modern Times. Now, what is apologetics? In an era where secularism and skepticism are the cultural norm, Christian apologetics is more important than ever. Christianity today has examined the changing role of apologetics and analyzed of the work of great apologists. And today we are very fortunate or blessed to have a very accomplished pastor and a great apologist as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like us all to welcome a very successful person in the field of servanthood. Let's all welcome Pastor Tim White. Pastor, warm welcome to you, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Angela Mota. I'm so excited about your program and what you're doing and just your gifts of leadership and studying leadership that this program is very important, and I'm very honored to be on it. My name's Tim White. I'm a pastor. I'm a professor. I'm an author, and I'm just nearing retirement, but I've got a lot of lessons that I've learned over the last 52 years. And one of my interests today is apologetics, because apologetics is evangelism. And throughout my life, I started a church from scratch where I didn't know any people. I had no financial backing, and it grew very large. And then I'm constantly been interested in reaching people that are not following Jesus Christ, the seekers. And in our community in Seattle, we have 70 to 80% of the people aren't a part of any church, and it's going up. And we're the fifth most unchurched state in the United States. Now it was number one when I moved there. And so my lifelong ambition has been to communicate to people that I disagree with. I didn't want people to come to our church out of other churches. I wanted people that had good reasons why they weren't a part of a church, or why they weren't following Christ. They'd rejected him. And so I wanted to be in the court of the Gentiles and speaking to the community. And I think that's the task that we have as the church is dropping down in its influence and its attendance, to be able to communicate to those that we wouldn't even be able to have a conversation with. Instead of talking about them, talking to them. We have great sermons all the time about, well, the young generation's doing this, or these people believe this way, the liberals believe this way, instead of talking to whoever we're trying to talk to rather than about them. That's my focus.
Wow. May I call you Reverend? Okay,
yes.
Reverend Pastor, what methodologies and strategies did you adapt in your seminaries? Because you have founded several seminaries, and a lot of people have been enriched in your seminaries. So, what methodologies and strategies of teaching and practice of Christian apologetics did you adapt in your seminaries that you saw, or you've noticed to be very powerful?
Yeah, I've only started one seminary, Washington Seminary, I was the president of, but the rest of the time I was teaching at other seminaries or universities, teaching at Northwest University, Fuller Theological Seminary as a leader of for discipleship, and Videra Seminary. But what we wanted to do at Washington Seminary was to bring the very best educators in to meet with lay people. So we call it a seminary for lay people, and to be able to answer the questions that they were having. So I would ask each professor to teach with the Socratic method. In other words, teach by asking questions. And some people think that Socrates started it, but I think that Jesus was the most proficient in this, because so many conversations he started with a question. So you take someone that's very skilled at Old Testament history or New Testament history. Both are issues for apologetics, because so many people are uneducated about the archaeological foundation that we have for our beliefs and what the Bible teaches, or the historical foundations.
Yeah.
But they don't know how to relate that to anyone. And so if they can start out by just asking questions like, what do you think about the Old Testament? Is it accurate? What do you think about the dates of the Old Testament? Is it be just thrown away? And start with questions so they could really be answering the questions. It's that lay people are wound up with the right questions. They're not just speaking to people that already agree with them. And it would make a very dynamic setting, especially give it to intelligent, educated professors to have that task of crossing the ages and crossing the cultural differences to communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ. What a privilege it is to be a part of that.
Let me take you from the strategy of asking questions. The strategy of asking questions, because you were talking about one of those very effective strategies is not to teach it by monologue, right? Not to teach it
Yes.
by monologue, and engage the audience in a way that they could also think, and they could also participate and own, own the ideas. I like what you said. Um, is it your way of saying that we need to teach apologetics
Yeah.
or whatever topic we have in the seminaries? We need to be more practical and relational by using the question method, by engaging the audience so that they don't feel they feel connected, or some sort of a connection to the professor, and that when they feel this connection to the professor, they don't get bored, and they get more encouraged to learn, and they become more enthusiastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my heroes is N.T. Wright there, right in England where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he is such a model of engaging and having conversations about topics that Christians normally wouldn't have conversations,
Mm-hmm.
such as evolution or the historicity of the Bible. Can we be trusted, or the text itself?
Yeah.
And people have so many questions about it whenever you put it in such a practical way. That's why
Mm-hmm.
his books are best-selling books, because he asks about the resurrection. How do we live out the resurrection? Or all the different studies, even his book on the Apostle Paul, I love. It approaches it from that way, because it was God's idea to ask questions and be in conversations. Think about when Adam sinned and he was hiding. And what does God say? He doesn't say, I see you, Adam, you're hiding behind the bush over there. He says, Adam, Adam, where are you? And he enters this relationship, this conversation with a broken man to bring it to restoration by being in this constant conversation with him. Well, some Christians believe that God is off in the distance and doesn't interact with us all. And others take a pantheistic approach, and they think that God does every single thing, like if it's a sunny day, or if it's something happens, that God's actually around the corner and was the dog that ran away with your books or something like that. They blame it all on God. And so they're not in that conversation with people of just asking those questions. And that's what God did. That's what Jesus did. That's what C.S. Lewis did. And that's what we need to do more of this age, particularly because we live in a narcissistic age. It's all fast food. It's all about us. We raise kids that they don't even understand the needs of the rest of the family. They'll ask about themselves, because we're not only living the narcissistic age, we're teaching to the next generation. And then we're saying, oh, I'm so frustrated with the next generations. We've just taught them what's slowly been coming in and enculturated into our lives. And it wasn't from Christ. And so, yeah, I'm excited about that topic.
Right. But let me just go back to the strategies and structures.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you think we need to educate or re-educate the pastors? Number one, that's my first question. Do we need to re-educate the pastors? second question, which is adjunct to that, is do we need to screen our pastors? Because in some
Yeah.
continents, I know that there are some pastors who cannot read the Bible, and I was wondering whether they could really teach the Bible effectively. They couldn't even read, because I know that the Bible is it is a scholar's book, um, and I couldn't wrap my head around that idea of a pastor who cannot read.
Yeah. Well, I think that's caused by a slow process has been taking place in the world and the church. In the 1940s, when Billy Graham emerged on the scene and others, we lived in a world that was separated by two opposites. One was the modernists, that the people are trying to make the church so relational that they were losing, even they weren't even checking with the scriptures or checking with history or archeology or anything like that. And those were the fundamentalists, and those of us that just we're going to proclaim it no matter what. But that proclaim it no matter what took us out of the conversation. So there's some great evangelicals like C.S. Lewis that entered into the conversation. They have a huge impact on the world. And he asks the questions that people are thinking about, and he has the conversation. And C.S. Lewis was so great as relational skills. We see by all the letters that he had with continuing people, not for fame, but just because he loved people and God was to him. We need to do the same things. We need to not to be caught in that chasm between the two opposites, but to bear like Christ, to cross the chasm and begin to communicate. And that means, do we re-educate the pastors? Yes, all of us need to be re-educated. I have two very bright daughters who have done well in graduate school and are succeeding in their fields. And they were telling me one time, and this is part of them just listening to the world, that, Dad, you always keep mansplaining. And I was like, what's mansplaining? And that's when a man, particularly a white male, wants to tell everyone everything all the time. We it's not a conversation, it's a monologue, and we interject the answer for everything. We know the fix to everything. And so there's a lot to learn. Well, that's a life-changing lesson, but one that bore fruit as far as apologetically talking to people that I may disagree with, because I was listening to what they had to say and I was actually learning from them. So yeah, pastors need to be re-educated, screened. I think we do need screening of pastors, and many denominations do that because there's someone that maybe isn't ready for the pressure or the work ethic or the schedule that they have to have, and they shouldn't be even going into that field. But more to teach and to take people and to learn what we're learning and learn from them in the process of what are the questions that are keeping people from the church. They're causing people to turn away and leave the church, and then begin speaking in those terms, just as Jesus did when he met the woman at the well. He said, he asked her a question first, could you give me some water? And then he starts going in this two-way conversation that she's just never talked to anyone like that.
You're right. Now let's go to, because you mentioned, and I think this is very interesting, bridging the gap between modernism and fundamentalism, because this is an art. I think there has to be a certain science and art applied to this so that we can marry fundamentals and modernism, fundamentalism and modernism, because we cannot just be modern without the fundamentals. And we cannot just be fundamentals because we live in the modern age. So what do you think would our pastors are listening right now? I'll be propagating this to some of the pastors that I know. I mean, so how can they marry modernism with fundamentalism? Well, I'm not very conservative, but you see, I think ultra modernism in the church is getting out of the fundamentals of faith. I don't know, concerts in church, like so much drums, a little bit is okay. I not only that, well, as you've mentioned, another question which is adjunct to this is that during the modern age we are so much entertainment focused, and so there are some pastors who failed to train a team, to help them out. It's like they forgot the qualitative and quantitative expansion of the kingdom on earth, because everything is just focused on them, and they iconize themselves, and they become the alpha and the omega of the church, and that they forgot, and they forget still.
Yeah.
It's happening right now. They forget to empower their members and change them into leaders, and they forgot to
Mhm.
to empower their leaders to become agents of change. And
Yeah.
it's quite bothersome for me. And so I would like you first to answer the first question, which is, how can we marry modernism with fundamentalism, or vice versa, and how can we address this kind of, the iconicism of pastors in churches?
Yes. Very good question. And I can see right in tune with what's going on today. I would look at it this, my first rebound would be to say, just a picture of two polar opposites existing in the church. That was in the 1940s between fundamentalism and modernism. It's been growing for some time, but today it's much different. It's not just two opposites, because we have the evangelicals that emerged, that, like some C.S. Lewis and others, that would say, let's communicate, and let's study, and let's go to the best schools and graduate from Harvard and still be committed Christians. And so it's not just two polar opposites, it's more syncretism, and addressing syncretism in the church. Syncretism is when the church, clear from the very first century, would start borrowing from the culture around it without really even questioning it. It happens so slowly and so disguised that you don't know that you're becoming like that. So, for instance, First John traditionally was written to the church that accepted Gnosticism. Now, we know that it was written actually before that. Today, it was probably a precursor of Gnosticism, which is Valentinianism. But basically, the gospel had changed without even knowing it, and the Apostle John, the last living apostle, addresses that in First, Second, and Third John. That's been happening throughout the ages in the church. Today, it is, as you mentioned, is an entertainment culture. And yeah, we're going to need to do some of the entertainment. You go to churches and there's lights that are more expensive than the building, and smoke, and incredible musicians up there. But we need to learn how to do it Christ's way,
And
and not by.
clowning, like pastors who act like clowns on stage.
What was that?
I,
Sorry.
well, and some preachers acting like clowns on stage instead
Yeah.
of teaching people the right way, uh, something like that. How can we address all this?
Yeah, it's a very careful and logical breakdown and review of ourselves in Christianity, to say maybe we bought in too much to the entertainment culture, and maybe there's too much self-oriented, that pastors should be like Jesus sent out his disciples to be force multipliers.
Mm.
They would go and they'd say, okay, I want you to go start a church in Athens, or I want you to start a church in Philippi. And then they went and they'd raise up leaders that were all wanting to be the show, not competing to become the show, the icon follows, but they're wanting to do what Christ wanted to do. They're wanting to empower ministry. So they're looking at Lydia, and they're thinking, here's a leader that we could start a small group in her house that would grow into a church, instead of like, it's all about me and you want my autograph after this. And I know many pastors are wrestling with it all the time, but if we can just confess that we as a church are re-evaluating the entertainment culture, and that maybe so many pastors and evangelists fall because there's just too much pressure on them trying to be the movie star of the church. And movie stars fall all the time, but they don't think anything about it. And we're caught in that culture, and then we wonder why our pastors fall in the same way. It's because they're human beings. I've been a pastor for 52 years. Many of my best friends in seminary and in life became major pastors that you'd know their names, but and part of it was the pressure that was put on them by taking this non-biblical role as far as ministers. Instead of becoming the star, they were becoming a force multiplier. Like, who can I raise up and how can I teach them not to try to take the stardom from me, but to actually all of us focus on Jesus Christ and see what Jesus would do. And that's a major shift in our strategy.
Right. So talking about strategy, how can Christian leaders now expand Christianity quantitatively and qualitatively? Because sometimes we just see churches ballooning up, with a single superstar pastor, and there's no training on leadership management for everyone. So how can Christian churches now expand qualitatively first and then quantitatively?
Yeah. So I had my advising professor on my dissertation was Dallas Willard, and I got the opportunity to know him personally. And that was one of the biggest focuses that he had, was on dealing with the cultural syncretism that's moved into the church, and how do we do this much better. And one of his things was he hated to say discipleship, because people would look at it as, I'm doing discipleship now, and they wouldn't ask, what are they discipling? What's the information that you're discipling? Are you just doing the same dumb things, repeating them over and over again? Or are you a fellowship of people that are in light and being lifted up by the scriptures, and their whole focus of their life is on Jesus Christ? So the greatest leaders are people that focus on Jesus Christ and not themselves, and they are raising up leaders and great leaders. And we've got to adapt to that kind of a strategy that's more biblical than the narcissistic strategy of our age. We wonder why the next generation is so narcissistic. Is because we are narcissistic.
We are narcissistic, yeah.
Yeah, and it isn't like a volitional choice that we made. It just creeped in on us. It's everywhere you can see. And so we use it or business for the models of the Christian church, and those aren't the models of the Christian church. Jesus is the model of the Christian church. How did he approach things? And he raised up force multipliers.
Yeah. Now, how can we bring the church to the world and not the world bringing itself to us? Because I think it's the other way around, right? It's like the world influencing the church and not the church influencing the world. So how can we influence the church? I mean, the world now.
Yeah. So
how can we make our voice louder and more profound and more effective, so that we gain back our mandate?
Yeah. Well, that's a very great question, and it's a question of our age. And I think there's many ideas that you have that I haven't heard that I need to learn from you, and from other people. We're all in the process of asking that question, and so to realize that it isn't like I don't know all the answers, but I can be in the conversation to learn the answers, and as I learn, the people that follow me will learn. And so just to be in that process of learning from people that are from different backgrounds, scientists that believe there's no historicity to the life of Christ or the scriptures. We need to be in conversations with them, or Muslims, or Hindus, or atheists and agnostics. We're going to learn from all of them how to really bring the gospel to them by being in a conversation, by loving them and caring for them and praying for them. But there's so many ideas. I'm sure you could talk for a long time about this.
Yeah. Pastor, Reverend, you made mention that the Bible is a scholar's book, or we made mention, I think, during our pre-podcast, that a scholar's book. Now, do you think pastors must be well-rounded? I think you also have made mention that pastors or preachers or evangelists must be able to use some scientific words, because this is the era of science, and almost everybody can understand the Bible using the scientific perspective of it. But I have some addition to that. But let me ask you this question also: that do you think pastors must be well-rounded, because they have to be better informed, knowledgeable, not only about what the rhetorics in the Bible, but also what is happening around us, and they must also be informed, and they must be able to connect the Bible with the current trends that we are in right now?
Yes. So I think that's really a deep question. It has many aspects to it. One of the hermeneutics of Scripture is to be able to, or the art and science of interpretation, is to understand that the simple truth of Scripture, the unadulterated truth, that we need, that's plain for a child can read the Bible and they can read, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son," and in its meaning that's so powerful. And sometimes we can become so educated that we filter that and change it and adapt it to our culture instead of just communicating with our culture. And so yeah, there's a lot that we goes into it, but the language of our culture, the people we want to reach, our college kids who have fallen away from Christ, and maybe their own children, they're asking questions in a whole other language than what we're speaking. They're asking a question in the language of science, which is the language for modern era, language of technology. It doesn't even buy into everything, and we're in a conversation with that. We're helping them to learn and grow because we're on the same page, just talking about the same issues. And if the leaders do that, and the leaders in plural, in a collaborative way, then their followers do that too. So one of the things that I did early on is I would prepare my message, whether it was how to fix a broken marriage or something like that. And then I would go to the mall, to the coffee shop there was so many foot traffic, and people would sit down, they'd talk to me, and I'd say, I'm a pastor, I'm working on my sermon. They're like, well, I'm not a Christian at all. I'm like, exactly, that's the person I want to talk to. Then they would start telling me like, well, you're asking the wrong questions, or I don't understand what you mean by washed in the blood. That sounds gross to me. Or, breaking down my language so I can say, oh, good, let me put it in a way that people may understand better. And so we learn and process in that conversation like Jesus had with everyone he came in contact with, of how to bring that gospel, that world-changing, life-changing, family-saving, healing gospel to where people are at so they can be lifted by it.
Wow. You also made mention that this is our pre-podcast, that most people would say that seminaries are cemeteries. Would you like
Well, that's what came about through the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s. They'd find that pastors that came back that were so learned, and and through my education, I've had to learn 6 languages. I have 2 doctorates, and a Masters of Divinity is a very accomplished master's. And then I went to undergraduate at a secular school. But I can become so excited about what I've learned that I can try to communicate it without staying in touch with people. So some of the most successful ministers throughout history are people that never went to cemetery or seminary. That's what the lay people call it.
Seminary, okay. All right.
Yeah. And it's because they felt like it was dead. It was going right over their heads instead of communicating with them. And so someone that just came along that was touched by the gospel would develop these powerful ministries, but they would forget how to interpret from Scripture. And so one of the reasons that I believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, the authoritative word of God, is because when I read it, I say, wow, this is a piece that was probably written in 1400 BC. I've got to learn a lot about that time to be able to relate to my time. And that's what the difference with having to learn Hebrew and Aramaic and Latin and all the other things is just the simple process of trying to understand what God intended in the first place, so that we can relate it to us where God intends that message to strike. And so that happened for a while. I think churches and seminaries and Bible schools are focusing on trying to make it more relevant, but we've got a long ways to go. It's a major shift. We're behind the swing of the bat, and we'd say in the United States. Our bat's coming around too slow. But we still need to try to upgrade and to improve our ability to learn the Scriptures better, because there's so much good news. I found it that there's so many historical arguments that support the church, and archaeological arguments, and languages, but our job is to translate it to our modern culture. And I'm not the first one to say that, but it's what we're all saying now as we review what we've done in the church.
Yeah. Well, actually, you've made mention that a lot of people consider seminaries as cemeteries because it's just so boring. People become so spiritually drained because their focus was more on the intellectual pursuits rather than the spiritual pursuits. But don't you think we still need, I think we still need to study Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, and hermeneutics and everything because that's what we need. That's the fundamentals of faith. And for people to be able to understand the nature of the language, the nature of Hebrew and Greek, will give them a better understanding as to the culture of those people during that time. And them being able to understand the culture when the Bible was written, they'll be able to adapt and adjust that to the modern culture. Don't you think seminaries will, well, just my thoughts. I think seminaries will go on teaching and developing pastors and preachers intellectually because the Bible is an intellectual book.
Mm.
A lot of
Yeah.
philosophy, science, psychology, and whatnot. It actually covers all aspects of life. So what I have in mind is okay. Yeah, fundamentals must still be there, not to eradicate Hebrew and Greek because these are very important subject matters, and at the same time injecting the modern way of teaching. So I don't think it's not a problem of not a problem of content, but a problem of teaching style, right?
Yes, absolutely. You're
Mhm.
right on. Because the locus of the power is not on ourselves, it's on God and
Mm.
the people he should reach.
Yeah.
So you go through all this school, and I went, I don't know how many years of school, and I became a teacher. So I've never been out of school, professor.
Yeah.
And the focus would often be on me. And it's not just
Yeah.
someone else. We've all done this. And so,
Yeah.
I got straight A's in this program or something like that.
Mm.
No one cares about straight A's. I can't
Mhm.
work that conversation. That's not why they become a Christian. It's
Mhm.
not what I know and I can impress myself with. This starts with the
Mm.
professors too.
Mm.
It's how can we communicate this and
Mm.
practice every
Mm.
point? It's uh, understanding that the Greek Old Testament the Septuagint was written before Christ, but it was the standard of communication. That just answers so many questions. So alpha programs across the country start with people's questions, and it's starting with people's questions and us stepping out of the way and having the focus be on Christ and on them to encourage the conversation. We're the one that comes and introduces them to Christ. And so we want to know about them. We want to learn about their culture. We want to learn about their questions. They have many great ideas that would come out of that. And we want them to communicate to God directly eventually, right? That's what
Yeah.
conversion is. They have a personal relationship
The
with
more they
Christ.
understand, the more they're able to, the more they understand about the secrets of the Bible.
And seminaries and churches are doing that, and Bible schools. It's just a very hard thing to learn and grow authentically. And
Mm.
look at the Apostle Paul. He had the equivalent of 3 PhDs in his studies of Jewish studies, and
Mm.
he was constantly just bringing his words so practical and
Mm.
so
Mm.
deep that he was introducing us to this conversation with Jesus Christ.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. Now, what else did we teaching with questions? Now, let me wrap up because this is very important. This is
Okay.
so important for all of us because I I don't want to use the word losing, but it seems to be. It seems to be like Christianity is losing. So for all our viewers, these are very important factors that we need to consider.
Yeah.
We need to consider our methodologies. We need to revisit our strategies and adapt some some modern strategies while um, retaining the fundamentals of faith. I think that's what you. I think that's the synopsis of our podcast for today. So, is
Yes.
there anything else that we would like to add,
Well, I
Reverend?
think the focus on questions is just learning a new way. It's learning a new way of parenting. We don't come in and tell our kids like, this is why you're doing this. We want to learn why they're afraid to go to school, or why they don't have close friends. Not just tell them what our conclusion is. We've got to ask a lot of questions. So what I would do in teaching communications in a Christian college, I would have a presentation where all they could do in that presentation is ask questions, because questions are powerful, and God's Spirit will intervene. You know, the scripture said, don't take no thought of what you're going to say when you're drugged before men, that the Holy Spirit will speak to you. It's the same way when we enter into questions. So we ask our child, instead of telling them why they're afraid to go to school, we say, why are you afraid to go to school? And they'll say, because our family's so different from the school. Wow, never thought about that. And then we ask,
wow.
And then we ask,
this is very deep and very serious discussions that we had this afternoon. Can we do a repeat, like maybe 5 series of this, and let's go into the nitty-gritty next session? you know, nitty-gritty, like strategy, like 1 or 2 strategies that you could teach these pastors, how they should prepare, deliver their sermons, how could they lead their flock, how could they, the how-tos, you know.
And so many people are afraid of that, asking questions. They think that they're afraid of their faith, that, oh no, they're going to blow me away with all the answers of why there's no God. And when you ask a question, you can ask another question that leads in a different direction. And so the kids will say, you just don't understand. And then you can say, well, why don't I understand? Can you help me with this? And you can go in a direction. It's the same way with all the issues. Parents could be such better parents if they ask questions. Pastors would be better pastors if they sat down, instead of complaining about how the finance committee's treating them, to sit down and say, why is that you guys feel like you need to treat me this way? And is that what the Bible teaches us? Is that the model? And how can I adjust my style to be more biblical? Those are all opportunities for good news to leak into a conversation. And so to teach people to go, many people have taught the Socratic method, which is a method of teaching by questioning. They'll ask their students to go for a whole day and just ask questions, because you can actually lead conversations with questions too.
I agree with you. In fact, I was trained as a teacher before I became a lecturer. I just did not practice, classroom teaching, because I really don't believe in giving grades to students. But you're right. We were really trained just to ask questions. And lecture type is boring. And lecture type is boring. I think there are a lot of questions I like to ask you, and I think there are a lot of pastors also would like to ask you. So for those of you who've got questions, will you please write them down below so that we will be able to tackle them on our next podcast with Reverend Tim White. Reverend Tim White is I cannot read his resume because it's just so long, and I get overwhelmed with it. It might just take like 30 minutes of our podcast just reading his success stories in terms of ministries. So he is really an expert. As you know, in this podcast I really would like to guest people who have a track record, so that we all learn the real thing from them. And when we learn the real thing from the right people, then I think our church can grow qualitatively and quantitatively. So Reverend Tim White, I'm so honored to be with you today, and I hope we can still arrange another podcast for next week, and we can do some series on modern apologetics. How about that? Reverend, modern apologetics.
And God bless your ministry too. I mean, you're doing something very important. So all of us that are watching this podcast, we want to press like, we want to subscribe to it. We want to pray for you and your work, for your finances, for your emotional life, for your family, for every part of it, because we're all part of a team trying to change this world for Jesus Christ.
Well, it feels good to hear you say I'm a part of your team.
Yeah. part.
Well, part of your team. Thank you so much, Reverend Tim. let's arrange for other podcasts. I'm sure that a lot of people would really like. I'd really like to learn from you as well. I'm not a pastor. I'm not an ordained pastor, so I'm more of a trainer lecturer. So I this is just my contribution to the world, to our
Mhm.
Christian world, doing podcasts, interviewing experts.
That's great.
Mm.
Doing a good job.
So thank you. May we arrange for another podcast?
Yes.
And I'd like to read your book first, in modern apologetics, before we would do another podcast. And there's another one that I'd like to speak with you. There are a lot of us, not only pastors, but lay ministers and even people in the marketplace who would like to
Mhm.
accomplish more, before they pass on to the next life. And
Mhm.
you're a very accomplished servant of God, and I would like to be like you, and I'd like to learn from you as well. So as I learn from you, I'd like to put it on a podcast so that everybody learns from you. So
It's
thank
great.
you so much, Reverend Tim. Is there any other thing? Do you have some other, like, last words for this podcast? Last words before we go.
Main thing is thank God for what you're doing here, and I'm praying for that this is going to just explode and become an international podcast, and that more and more people will follow you because you're touching on the critical issues that we all need to face. Every one of us. And we're not talking about someone else that's made the mistakes. We're the people, that generation that made the mistakes, and we're still growing. God still isn't through with us, and we've got work to do.
Well, it's because I'm a frustrated pastor.
Yeah,
I wanted to be a pastor, but God called me in the marketplace ministry, so I have to obey Him.
that's
Well,
great.
yes, I really need to obey Him. Well, I might be a pastor someday, but for now, this is where God planted me, so I have to grow and bloom where God had planted me.
You're a pastor to pastors, so that's more important.
All right. Um, well, it's so heartwarming, and I think knowledge wise, I'm very full. And it made my spirit really dance with joy speaking with you. And you're a breath of fresh air, because we seldom speak with pastors this way. And pastors with balanced knowledge, with a better approach to teaching and to preaching, are actually very powerful these days. And Tim White is one of those. And if are you still accepting applicants for your seminaries in Seattle?
Um, Actually, I'm moving towards retirement, so yeah. I mean, the schools that I teach at Northwest University still accepts applicants, and Washington Seminary and passed it on. So, um, yeah, there's opportunities where everyone is to be able to dive into just the we're all on the same team, and whatever schools or churches that you're close to.
Yes. All right. So he actually, I feel guilty not able to read his credentials, but all right. Let me just read some of his credentials, because I told you, you have to introduce yourself, but you didn't. You're so humble. Okay, this is just so long, but I'm just going to read. Okay, he's the founding and senior pastor of Washington Cathedral. Um, since 1984, he has built multiple ethnic congregations worshiping in 7 different languages. Wow. And then he started from the scratch, for 33 years. He started Washington Cathedral. Now it has an amazing campus with an art gallery, 2 sanctuaries, a theater, an indoor zero entry pool, a gymnasium, a workout studio, a youth center, a state of the art Sunday school, a soccer field, a large waterfall, um, and so on and so forth. He graduated from Eastern Washington University, BA in psychology, and was awarded his Masters of Divinity by George Fox University in Portland, Oregon, and his doctorate at Fuller. Theological Seminary. He also lived in Jerusalem while studying archaeology at Jerusalem University. He received an honorary doctorate from St. Thomas Christian University in Jacksonville, Florida, for his work on institutional entropy. I don't understand this. Maybe you could have to explain this next time. Pastor Tim has inspired and led the creation of 5 nonprofit foundations that are primary outreaches into neighboring communities and that now extend worldwide. These foundations in evolutionary development stages are the Health Resource Center, Excel Business Ministries, Build a Family Center, Washington Seminary, and Together for Transformation, which is a leading global project helping the poorest of the poor living in around the Tegucigalpa City dump, and a lot more. Oh, Pastor Tim is previously a mentor of Fuller Theological Seminary, taught at Vidiera Seminary, Miami, Florida. He also is a current adjunct professor at Northwest University in Kirkland. You're all over the place. He is also a nationally recognized innovator. Um, he is internationally recognized innovator with a meta church concept. You should teach us
Mm-hmm.
this. Meta church concept. Okay, Washington Cathedral is a family of a congregation raising up the gospel in different languages, ethnicities, races, and cultures, including thriving churches such as Hispanic, Korean, Native American, Pacific Islander, Brazilian, Coptic, as well as a variety of culturally different Pacific Northwest congregation. How big is your congregation, Reverend? How big is your
Well,
congregation?
it's changed now. I'm retired, but that whole thing was written by a publicist on my 3rd or 4th book. I can't remember. And kind of a picture of where we were at that time.
Ah. All right, to continue, he is an avid sports enthusiast. Yeah, that's why you look so robust and healthy, you know? Yeah. Uh, he is a fisherman. You should come to Scotland. You know, we've got a lot of
Yeah.
lakes here where you can go fly fishing or net fishing. Um, he's a golfer too. Oh, we've got nice golf clubs
Yeah.
here. He enjoys outdoors, especially the Wallowa Mountains of Eastern Oregon, where he gained the inspiration to build a church. You should come. We've got a lot of mountains here as well. We live in a hilltop. I'm going to show you. Oh, you're not on WhatsApp. Maybe after the podcast, I'd like to tour you around our, the
Yeah.
mountains and stuff here. Yeah, but you're not on WhatsApp, so we will not be able. If you can connect with me on WhatsApp, then I can tour you around. But anyways, all right. Okay, going back to his my data, he is the author to Dreamers Long Forgotten and Outstanding, Joyful, Amazingly Simple. The Meta Church, a 21st century innovation with a first century foundation. Pastor Tim and his wife Jackie have 3 grown children, 2 sons-in-law, and 4 grandchildren. Wow, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so honored. I just consider myself to be an ordinary, simple woman, but I always thank God because He connects me with great men of God.
Great. I'm thankful for you.
And thank you for you too.
And yes, no Christian's ordinary. You're extraordinary.
Thank
So
you.
that's
I accept that. But yeah, we're extraordinary because of the great man who redeemed us and the Holy Spirit who empowers us.
mhm.
And without Him, we are nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
Hmm. All right. So for all of you, this is very casual, right? Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for learning with us. And if you do have some questions and some requests that Reverend Tim White would like you to teach us with, please let me know. Or just write it down below so that we will be able to learn more from him. And thank you so much for sharing with us your precious time. I I'm so grateful that during this generation there are still some people who understand what the Bible is and what
Mm.
its essence is. And I'm so thankful meeting scholarly Christians nowadays because they're depleting in numbers. because
Right.
of this. That's what you call like modernism with the church. People don't want to go to the seminaries because there's cemeteries. I hope seminaries will stay, and all
Yes.
those fundamental subjects must still be taught in a
Mhm.
modern way. I think that's it. So thank you and bye for
Thank you.
now. See you next podcast. Thank you so much, Reverend White. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm not going to.